Welcome to Mindset and Stone podcasts, where we dive deep into the most compelling books on the shelf. Join hosts Dave and Poppy as they uncover the stories, themes, and ideas that shape our understanding and inspire curiosity. Get ready to explore the big ideas that leave a lasting impact. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Mindset and Stone podcast. Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into a really powerful framework for everyday action. It's from Kaitlin B. Curtice's book, Living Resistance, an indigenous vision for seeking wholeness every day.
This is such a profound work. It goes so much further than, the surface level ideas of self-care or commercialized versions of wholeness.
It's not about buying a bath bomb and calling it a day.
Not at all. Curtice, who is Potawatomi, really reclaims liberation as our sacred inherent right. It's our ongoing mandate.
And I think our mission today is to really unpack that central idea that healing ourselves, nourishing our communities, and tending to the earth are all inseparable. They're all radical acts of resistance.
Absolutely. They're all woven together.
We've got a massive task ahead of us then. We're diving into a model for living that is cyclical, and it draws so deeply on indigenous wisdom.
And it spans these four interconnected realms. You've got the personal, the communal, the ancestral.
And then that crucial place where they all overlap, the integral realm.
Exactly. And understanding how these realms work together, not as like a checklist, but as a living ecosystem. That's the key.
The key to what?
To sustaining this commitment over a lifetime. I mean, this is really a manual for making your daily choices a conscious pushback against oppression.
Let's unpack this framework and really get into how our everyday choices become this fight for inclusive love and a more just society.
So to start, what exactly is this living resistance?
That's the foundational question.
Curtice argues that it's the conscious way we use our lives, how we use our energy to push against the toxic systems and, the dangerous ideologies of our time.
It's that constant push, that friction against a status quo that seeks to, diminish us, separate us.
All of the above. It's a constant act of pressure.
I really appreciate that the book immediately makes this crucial distinction. It's not just about resistance against something.
No, that's such a key point.
It has to be resistance for something. It's not just opposition for opposition's sake.
Exactly. So when you choose to resist, say, ableism in a space or racism in a policy, you're not just saying no.
You're actively choosing a better path forward, a more loving one. The choice is always proactive, always a move toward liberation.
And that idea connects directly to the structure of this lifelong practice. It has to be nonlinear.
The book is so insistent on this point.
And it's so important for preventing that burnout that so many people face, especially in activist circles.
Right. Curtice reminds us and reminds you, the listener, that your process isn't a straight line towards some finished goal.
It's cyclical. It's labyrinthine. It's full of ebbs and flows.
That imagery. A labyrinth instead of a straight path. That's so potent. It's like medicine for anyone who feels overwhelmed or, defeated because the change isn't happening overnight.
And that mantra she uses, you are a human being, you are always arriving.
That gives so much permission. Permission to slow down, to be messy, and to recognize that real change shouldn't be instantaneous. It's this ongoing process of becoming.
And that cyclical understanding is the foundation. It's what the four realms are built on, reflecting the gifts and cycles of Mother Earth.
She presents it so visually in the book, which I think really helps you locate yourself within the work at any given time.
It does. It's a map.
So let's walk through that map, the personal realm. She aligns it with the color red, symbolizing our lifeblood, our heart center.
Our day.
Yes. And it mirrors the season of winter. It's the time for turning inward, for necessary rest, for deep self-processing.
Then, moving outward, you have the communal realm. This is brown, representing Akiki, means dirt or earth.
So the planting season.
Exactly. It's about honoring our physical connection to the land and to each other. It's the space for solidarity, for kinship, for taking action outside of ourselves.
And then comes the ancestral realm. This one is represented by blue or imbish water.
Fluidity, movement, the constant flow of life and memory. This is the summer season.
It represents what grows and blooms for future generations, and that connection we have to maintain with our ancestors.
And the final piece is the integral realm, the sacred center.
The overlap, where all three commitments, personal, communal, and ancestral, flow together.
Seamlessly. It represents total acceptance and the freedom that comes from integrating all these practices into one cohesive life.
Okay, so let's unpack that first and maybe most challenging area, the personal realm. The journey of resistance, she says, begins with the self.
And specifically with curiosity.
But we're so often taught to trade our curiosity for security.
We are. Curtice notes that resistance always begins with questions. But we're conditioned, especially in colonial systems, in capitalism, to trust external authority.
Religious leaders, the media, institutions.
Right. We trust them more than our own sacred internal instincts. And that trade-off, curiosity for security, it means we stop asking the big, uncomfortable questions, the ones that might disrupt our comfort.
So how do we reclaim that innate, almost childlike curiosity?
Curtice suggests a really practical action. Just sit down and write out the questions you're holding inside yourself.
They don't have to be huge questions about global justice.
Not at all. They can be very personal micro questions, like, what does my body actually need to feel rested? Or what beliefs about myself did I pick up in childhood that don't serve my liberation anymore?
That willingness to question, that's what starts it.
It immediately initiates what she calls the holy work of deconstruction, critiquing the systems, the institutions, the ingrained beliefs that told us we were limited or wrong or somehow less than.
The real fear for a lot of people, the book argues, is in that in-between space of not knowing.
The emptiness.
Yes, that feeling. The moment when the old structure is gone, but the new one hasn't arrived yet.
Exactly. It's the waiting. We are so culturally conditioned to demand immediate answers, immediate conclusions.
But the willingness to just step outside of to sit in that emptiness and wait for a truth to emerge, that is a profound act of resistance in itself.
A resistance against manufactured certainty.
Okay, here's where the work gets really tangible. Art as resistance. Curtice argues that art is a tool we use to process the world, and by processing it on our own terms, we refuse to be put into simple colonial boxes.
She gives some powerful examples of contemporary indigenous representation, like the comedy shows Rutherford Falls and Reservation Dogs.
Why are those shows resistance?
Because they allow indigenous people to just exist, fully, with complexity, with humor, with nuance, without needing to apologize or fit into some simplistic historical narrative that was defined by settler culture.
It's the refusal to be flattened into a stereotype.
And this resistance is often conveyed through powerful symbols. You look at the raised fist. Curtice points out that this symbol has these incredibly deep historical roots.
From Mexican art movements.
All the way to that iconic image of Tommy Smith and John Carlos at the 1968 Olympics.
And we have to ask what that symbol means today. When it's used in modern art, or even just as a digital emoji.
And when we examine how symbols in art change over time, that's a form of resistance work in itself. It shows that meaning is fluid. It's always being redefined by the people who claim it.
But the art doesn't have to be this grand public statement. She shares this deeply personal story about finding healing through music, just playing an old, slightly out-of-tune piano in Vermont.
That simple act of creation, sitting with the instrument, letting the sound be imperfect, that was medicine for her.
It helped her slow down, become present, and just pay attention to her soul's rhythm.
That intimate, personal act of creation, whether it's writing a poem, playing music, painting, that's what brings you home to yourself, especially when you feel lost or scattered by all the pressures of the external world.
So art is a vital tool for resisting that status quo of internal hate and external pressure.
And this connects directly to the concept of embodiment.
Right. She argues that many of us live in a state of disembodiment, this disconnect between our mind and body.
Which was often taught, she says, through colonial impurity movements that encouraged shame around our physical forms.
Historically, colonialism tried to sever the relationship between indigenous peoples and the land.
And at the same time, it detached our bodies from our souls. It labeled them savage or broken or something to be controlled and disciplined.
So reclaiming embodiment is literally reversing that colonial project inside ourselves.
It is. I think the most powerful line in this section is that the body is made for resistance. Curtice emphasizes that strength and beauty look like so many different things. We do ourselves and our communities a profound disservice by buying into these narrow definitions of what an able or a normal body should look like.
So if all bodies belong,
then there is no abnormal. The journey of embodiment is lifelong. It's asking us to recognize that our bodies are this beautiful, vast, complex system of communication.
Which brings us to radical self-love.
Which Curtice insists is not a luxury item. It has to be the foundation of our daily lives.
We have to choose to enter the room of self-love, as the author Nashwa Zebian puts it, instead of that room of self-hatred.
And Curtice views this self-love as one of the most essential forms of resistance.
Why?
because it's the non-negotiable prerequisite for all the external work. If you're running on empty, if you neglect yourself, the work of fighting for justice in the world will inevitably catch up to you and just lead to burnout.
And that self-love translates into setting clear boundaries.
Absolutely. When you reclaim your own sacredness and establish limits around what you need, whether that's silence or rest or refusing to engage in unproductive debates,
That self-care isn't selfish.
it becomes political resistance. It becomes cultivated resilience. Rest is an active rejection of capitalism's demand for constant productivity.
That makes perfect sense. The personal realm is where you build the internal infrastructure for a lifelong commitment.
It's the foundation.
So let's look at some practical ways listeners can start engaging with this realm, like right away.
Okay, practical takeaway number 1. This one is focused on art as resistance. Find or create some artwork that expresses the specific kind of liberation or resistance you're currently striving for.
And then place it where it can speak to you often. So this could be a painting, a poem, a piece of music you listen to intentionally.
Right, something that anchors your internal sense of purpose.
Okay, practical takeaway 2, focusing on presence.
Create a new small ritual for yourself. This is all about establishing presence in the chaos.
So maybe it's a minute of focused breathing before you check your phone in the morning.
Or lighting a candle before you sit down to work. Or even just speaking a word of kindness over yourself.
And the key is to practice this a few times each week to intentionally foster that connection to the present moment.
And then, practical takeaway 3, the embodiment check.
Curtice encourages us to honor the body's journey and its wisdom.
So try writing a letter to your body. Acknowledge what it has carried and what it endures.
Or, more actively, practice short, intentional conversations with your body throughout the day. Just asking, what do you need right now?
Are you hungry, tired, stressed, needing movement? It's about establishing better signaling and a deeper self-connection.
So once we've done that difficult, courageous work of self-connection and self-love,
Curtice reminds us that this healing immediately ripples out
and we move naturally from the personal realm, that winter of introspection,
into the communal realm, our planting season.
the central effort here is planting seeds of solidarity and kinship.
It is. And this work is grounded in the radical belief that we belong to one another, that our shared humanity connects us, even when we face centuries of systems designed to divide us.
Through racism, classism, colonialism.
All of it. But this connection requires ethical practice. Curtice is very, very clear on this.
Our spiritual, political, and communal realities, they don't exist in a vacuum.
No. We have to pay attention to the how of our practice, particularly when it comes to cultural appropriation.
The book really calls out the commodification of spiritual practices. Things like yoga, wellness rituals, even certain ceremonial elements.
By the dominant culture. Appropriation happens when Western culture strips these practices from their original context, removing their depth and meaning.
And often profiting from them while completely ignoring the people and cultures that created them.
It's the theft of meaning. It essentially says that the original practice, as taught by the colonized culture, isn't valuable enough on its own.
That it has to be sanitized or whitened and divorced from its complex roots to really matter or be profitable.
And this focus on ethical communal practice, it extends to fighting ableism.
The book stresses that solidarity means actively resisting spaces and systems that only value able-bodied participation.
We have to recognize the harm in practices like, for instance, unsolicited healing prayers directed at disabled people.
Because it assumes they're broken and need fixing.
Right. Rather than seeing them as whole beings who are worthy of respect and full inclusion just as they are.
She gives a really sharp example of this, the conflict that arose during the pandemic about accessible spaces.
I remember this. An Anglican priest suggested abandoning online church services to return only to embodied in-person worship.
And Curtice points to that as a profound act of ableism. It completely overlooked disabled and immunocompromised people who rely on those accessible online spaces for full community engagement.
The status quo so often values the gathering of the privileged, able-bodied majority.
So ethical resistance in this communal realm means ensuring our solidarity actively fights for spaces that are inclusive of all body types, all accessibility needs, all chronic illnesses.
We have to support models that center marginalized voices rather than perpetuating that skinny, white, able-bodied ideal you see in so many wellness industries.
Which brings us to practical takeaway number 4, focusing on solidarity in practice.
Support wellness and fitness spaces that prioritize diversity in their teachers and their trainings. She mentions organizations like Teach All Yoga.
Which actively works to resist the white Western status quo of these industries. So look for spaces that center South Asian, queer, and disabled voices.
And the communal realm also fundamentally centers on protecting the land, or segmekwe.
Curtice emphasizes that colonialism built North America by systematically disconnecting people, both indigenous and non-indigenous, from the earth.
Treating it like a resource or commodity, rather than as a sacred relative that deserves our respect.
And this breakdown in relationship is directly tied to why we're facing a climate emergency today.
It is. Curtice argues that fighting climate change is not just an environmental effort. It's a necessary spiritual and relational repair.
We have to deconstruct that colonial idea that humanity has dominion over the land.
And instead understand through indigenous wisdom that we belong to her.
As the book points out, the climate activist Marianne Heglar states it so plainly.
She says the fossil fuel industry was literally built on the backs of and over the graves of indigenous peoples.
So the environmental fight is inseparable from the racial justice fight and the fight against colonialism.
And that natural connection provides a really smooth transition into the ancestral realm.
Represented by blue and ambush, water.
This realm reminds us that we are part of a massive, never-ending cycle, deeply connected to the past and to the future.
Curtice uses the concept of the 7 generations prophecy here.
Right. The idea that our decisions today must consider the impact on the 7 generations that came before us and the 7 generations that will follow us.
We owe our ancestors and our future descendants a life marked by care, by truth-telling, and by decolonization.
So the ancestral realm invites us to face history head-on.
Curtice makes it clear that decolonizing work is about fixing what is broken now for the benefit of those future generations.
And this requires dismantling the foundational colonial ideologies that shape the modern world.
One of the most critical of these is the doctrine of discovery. The book mentions it, but we really need to understand the weight of this framework.
It was a theological, philosophical, and legal framework that goes back to papal bulls in the 15th century.
And these bulls essentially gave Christian governments the moral and later the legal right to invade and seize indigenous lands and to subjugate non-Christian peoples everywhere.
And crucially, this isn't just ancient history. The doctrine of discovery became embedded in U.S. case law. The 1823 Supreme Court case Johnson v. Emmentosh,
which established that only the U.S. government, not individual indigenous nations, had the right to sell or transfer title to the land.
And that legal framework still impacts indigenous sovereignty today.
So resistance in the ancestral realm means fighting for truth-telling and actively challenging the historical myths we were taught.
Which is why Curtice specifically critiques the narrative around Thanksgiving.
The book argues that the holiday is built on deeply ingrained lies about how the early Europeans treated the Wampanoag people.
And these historical mistruths are often intentionally buried by government and cultural narratives.
So to indigenize this holiday, as she suggests, is to recognize that gratitude should be practiced every single day.
Not just by celebrating a myth that was built on the oppression and eventual near eradication of the Wampanoag people.
Decolonization requires this continuous effort, questioning the systems and the mindsets we inherited.
And Curtice is careful to note that this work requires the sincere cooperation of indigenous and non-indigenous people alike.
But it must be led by indigenous voices who are already leading the fight for the earth and for kinship.
And as an act of resistance and honor, we have to commit to continually unlearning these historical mistruths. Which brings us to our next takeaway.
Practical takeaway number 5, a decolonizing habit.
Start by learning about the indigenous peoples of the specific land you currently live on, both the past inhabitants and the present-day communities.
And you can research and support indigenous food organizations. Maybe order wild rice or other goods from groups like Honor the Earth, and in doing so, support indigenous food sovereignty.
And now we make that final transition. We arrive at the integral realm, the sacred center.
The overlap where our personal commitment to self-love, our communal commitment to solidarity, and our ancestral commitment to historical truth all flow into one.
Curtice describes this as the place of total acceptance and freedom, where all the binaries start to crumble.
That sounds incredible. But how do you sustain that? The massive, complex effort required to live in that nuanced, integral space for a lifetime, it sounds exhausting.
She uses this beautiful analogy. She compares the work of lifelong resistance to the relationship between resistance and cadence in cycling. So if you're cycling and you're resisting too hard or using too fast a cadence, you just burn out. You spin out.
Right, and if you go too slowly with too high resistance, you stall, you make no progress.
Precisely. We have to find that sweet spot of movement and effort where the work and the movement of the work come together.
And that allows us to generate the speed we need to make ourselves stronger without destroying ourselves in the process.
That liminal space of balanced, sustained effort, that's where true resilience is.
And part of this integration involves reimagining our sacred practices, pulling them out of those rigid, colonized structures.
Yes. She explores prayer as resistance.
Many people grew up with a colonized version of prayer, right? One built on fear, shame, exhaustive apologies, lists of sins.
The book argues we have to move past those shackles and torture of guilt-based faith to find prayer in tiny, everyday moments.
So prayer becomes resistance when it's just seamlessly integrated into all aspects of your life.
Found in a poem, or in the intentional loving care of a loved one, or in reclaiming ancestral languages. Curtice talks about using Potawatomi prayers to affirm her connection to the divine, Mama Gosnan.
So it's about rejecting colonial boundaries and arbitrary rules about how to be spiritual.
It's about finding intimacy with the sacred freely, wholly, and in every possible way.
And building on that, when institutions are crumbling, when toxicity is rising, when the news cycle feels just overwhelmingly negative.
Holding a fierce, clear vision for a better, more equitable world is a refusal to surrender.
Curtice is drawing on a tradition of visionaries here, like the author Arundhati Roy famously said.
We can choose to walk through difficult times lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine and ready to fight for another world.
The sheer act of maintaining hope and a vision for liberation when systems are trying to impose dystopia on you, that is inherently revolutionary.
And this integral work also requires us to manage the tools we use in that communal space, specifically social media.
Right. She observes that while it can be a powerful tool for connection and care, it is so often weaponized for trauma and for outrage.
She points out a really exhausting reality. Posts that detail pain or colonization often get way higher interaction and engagement than posts soliciting joy or shared nourishment.
That addiction to trauma stories, it leaves the people sharing their experiences exhausted.
And it can lead to a cynical, draining environment that actually impedes resistance instead of helping it.
So that feedback loop has to be resisted if the digital space constantly demands your outrage just to pay attention.
Then setting boundaries around that consumption is a critical act of self-preservation and integration.
So, practical takeaway number 6 addresses this directly.
Try taking regular breaks from social media. Delete the apps for 1 full week every 6 weeks, or even more often.
This lets you gain perspective on how the tool is being used versus how it can truly serve you.
And it ensures you lean into the love and clarity that comes from intentional rest.
And finally, integrating our commitment to curiosity and unlearning is essential for this integral realm.
We need to be able to name the toxic cycles of white supremacy, ableism, colonialism, and disrupt them intentionally.
And that ability to name and disrupt is built on relentless questioning.
Which brings us to our last takeaway, number 7, curiosity and unlearning.
Start an ongoing, active list of questions you have about history, about your own inherited beliefs, and about the systems around you.
Embrace that childlike curiosity you need to unlearn the mistruths that keep these toxic cycles in place. It is never too late to start something new and to tell the truth where it was missing before.
Wow. This deep dive into living resistance has so profoundly demonstrated that resistance isn't an event or a slogan.
No, it's the fundamental sacred rhythm of being human.
It's a continuous, flowing process of arriving, of healing, and of connecting across the personal, communal, and ancestral realms.
I think the most vital and maybe the most countercultural takeaway from her work is that our deliberate care for ourselves, our rest, our embodiment, our boundaries, that is political resistance.
Our everyday acts of nourishment have these undeniable ripple effects of liberation for the entire ecosystem.
Every single micro move we make brings nourishment to the world.
We were made for these times. We have the tools, the wisdom of our ancestors, and the necessity of care to move forward. So here is your commitment to lifelong resistance, building on the framework we've just discussed.
And as you close this deep dive, just remember the words Curtice wants to affirm. Do not give up before the end. Keep going, finish the song, take the last glorious bite.
Take these actions to heart and commit to the ongoing journey. First, explore art in a new way. Find a piece that speaks to your current resistance. Second, create a small, new ritual to foster deep presence in your day. Third, practice active, intentional conversations with your body. Fourth, actively support marginalized voices in wellness and fitness spaces. Fifth, Learn about the indigenous peoples of the land you currently dwell on, past and present. 6. Take regular scheduled breaks from social media consumption. And 7th, start an ongoing list of questions about history to embrace the power of unlearning mistruths.
Resistance is for you. Resistance is for us. We believe in us.
We hope you're leaving with fresh insights and a spark of inspiration. Remember to subscribe, leave a review, and check back for more episodes as we dive into new worlds of thought, one book at a time. Until then, keep your mind set in stone and your curiosity open. This has been a Big L Riz Media podcast, where big ideas meet lasting impressions.